Um, well, since you're here, I figure everyone is at least familiar with your zodiac sign and maybe even reads your personal horoscope in the newspaper every day. One of the, I hate to try and diss the mainstream astrology, but that is really the lowest common denominator out there amongst in the astrology area. I know there's a lot of skeptics to astrology who maybe think that they're over vague generalizations and that there are just very generic things that could apply to anyone, and they think it's ridiculous that 1 out of every 12 people could have the same day every day, and that's because that is a ridiculous idea. There is so much more potential and so much more information out there that astrology can give you beyond just your daily horoscope or your sun sign. You can go, you can measure within one lifetime or throughout spanning different lifetimes the soul's evolutionary state, where it's going, where it's coming from, what the lessons are for each life, how to facilitate those changes, the best ways to evolve, what we need to do those things. You can, I know if you've read your horoscopes in the paper and it says, Mars and Gemini like to travel a lot, or Venus in Virgo is very analytical or detail-oriented. But even that, those are all very just condensed, watered down, overgeneralized things. And that's kind of one way that they kind of make fun of astrology in the media and the mainstream press. And, they think it's all they've figured out in 10,000 years of studying astrology is, stay away from Virgos today or whatever. And obviously there's a lot more degree you can go to than that on it. Because every sign and house and planet placement has a multitude of degrees and different ways that it can come out and present itself. It can, someone with Mars and Virgo can be very analytical and detail-oriented and very critical of others, or they can be very much into natural foods, natural eating, helping others, performing service to others, being in healthcare. And then you also have the people with Mars and Virgo can be very irritable or violent even, and on the other end, on the front end too, they can be just like the most passive, people just wanting to help. And there's many ways to look into exactly how these planets can exhibit themselves. And beyond just the signs themselves, you have different evolutionary states. You have how the planets are interacting with the nodes and with Pluto. And it can give you a wide variance into how these things display themselves. Now, I will break some of that down a little bit. But like I was saying, that our society is kind of force-fed now. We want cheap, fast, non-quality imitations, from our food to technology to communication and that's kind of where a lot of people get the wrong idea about astrology, from your daily horoscopes. And I'm sure everyone gets on the computer and you can sign up for your personalized horoscope to get delivered to your email. And even those, with your correct information, Those are more detailed than what you'll get out of the newspaper, but even those are lacking something because there's still levels beyond that. And that's why we still have people that are practicing astrologers, because even a computerized generated report still cannot gauge what evolutionary state a person is in or count all their past experiences, what they're moving towards, what they're coming from. A computer can't put all those pieces together. Also, what we have is what did I do there? Well, first of all, I put a few quotes in here for you on the first page of your handout, just to see how, even though in the mainstream media or politicians or mainstream religious or cultural organizations will kind of make fun or make light of astrology, the people that are in the know and have a lot of the real power out there, but they know different because governments, politicians, organizations of all sorts have used astrology going back for minimum 5,000 years. They can trace back. Every civilized organization has used some form of astrology, whether it's for planting, growing crops, best time to anoint leaders. So even J.P. Morgan, who originated J.P. Morgan Chase, said millionaires don't have astrologers, billionaires do. And you see Carl Jung, astrology is assured of recognition from psychology without further restrictions, because astrology represents the summation of all the psychological knowledge of antiquity. And Hippocrates said, a physician without a knowledge of astrology has no right to call himself a physician. There is one common flow, one common breathing, all things are in sympathy. And that on a bigger sense is kind of how they keep people divided and from knowing the truth about astrology and other things governments may want to keep people from knowing. As they kind of divide these things up and make them look, you can take anything and make it look silly. Just like they have that series of books for idiots, the psychology for idiots and physics for idiots. And there's a reason they're called that. It's because they've condensed this the lowest form of that. And that the book for idiots is not, the Idiot's Guide to Psychology is not all there is to psychology. That's just a dumbed down version they've put out there of it. So, in fact, during World War II, Hitler had employed all the best astrologers in Germany and actually killed or forced the other ones to leave the country, so that he was the only one that had any astrologers working on his side. In fact, afterwards, the United States also employed some astrologers to combat Hitler's astrologers. So even though they'll make fun of this stuff in the media and stuff, they all use it. All companies, every major corporation just about has consultants. And even though that's a dirty word, they all use this stuff. They hire people to tell them the best time to market a new product, when's the best time to run a new ad, consolidate, buy other companies. They just list them as consultants on their bankroll. So it's all kind of we don't use astrology. So I guess overall that's kind of what attracted me to evolutionary astrology. And probably, has anybody heard of evolutionary astrology before? Okay. Okay, it was started a few decades back, but actually the main teacher is named Jeffrey Wolf Green, and he's the one that developed this system and promoted it. And one of the best things about it is that it not only can give you answers, it not only can ask questions or tell you, Tauruses love to eat or Geminis love to talk. It can give you much more detail on what state the individual is in, where they have come from, where they're going to, how to facilitate that growth. And you can see that even with all the negative press and stuff out there about astrology, I mean, it's been carried on for thousands of years, and it's still used in every culture today. And that evolutionary astrology actually comes from the Eastern astrology, because it has more of a psychological tint to it, much more than the sun or moon-based astrology we get here. The Western astrology traditionally is based upon the sun signs. The Eastern astrology focuses on the moon or the ego. Evolutionary astrology, the main focus is on the outer planets, because these have much longer lasting transits. They affect cultures, generations, groups of people, as opposed to the shorter transits where, like, Venus or Mercury will take like 3 weeks to go through a sign. Pluto will take 15 years. Neptune can take 12 to 15 years. Uranus can take 8 years. These planets that stick around for a long time, they further the evolution of mankind as a whole on a bigger level, because it's slower moving, more focused energy, as opposed to something that just is here and gone. I mean, if you have a good Venus transit coming up, it's nice and they're always pleasant, but they last 3 weeks, so by the time you really figure out what to do with it, it's gone. And so that's why we get more out of the outer planet transits, because you have a lot more time to figure out what's going on, how to deal with them, what changes do I need to make, why is this happening. And that's one of the other great things about evolutionary astrology, is you kind of get answers to those questions, to the why am I here, what is my purpose, what am I doing here, why do I attract the same people into my life over and over again, why do I run into the same situations, why do I run into the jobs where I'm not appreciated. And people will keep drawing these circumstances back into their life over and over again until they figure it out. And so that's one reason we all have the friends that are, go through the same things over and over again, and we get tired of hearing it. But that's one good reason to have patience with people, because, once they do figure it out, then, they don't have to keep reliving those patterns. And as I skipped a spot there, didn't I? As we move forward with Pluto transits, and those can take 15 to 18 years, and those affect an entire generation. So I kind of don't prescribe to the generational thing, the Generation X, Generation Y, where they try to put 10-year periods into assigned groups to 10-year periods. I think they're much longer than that. I actually go with the Plutos, as long as it stays in the sign. And then also we have, as Pluto correlates with the soul, we actually evolve through our physical, emotional body. And that's the moon. So when people experience emotions, that's how we evolve the most, because that's what feels the most personal and affects our ego the most. So as we go through those situations, those transits, that's how we evolve. And Mars is, we have upper and lower octaves. Some planets have lower octaves. Like Neptune, and it's a higher octave, Venus is the lower octave. And like Neptune is the higher expression of love, Venus is the lower octave. It's the more like personal expression of love. And the same thing with Pluto. Pluto is how the soul evolves, and then its lower octave is Mars. And Mars is very instinctual based. It's aggression, it can be the sex drive, it can be how we initiate things, what we put our energy into. And that's kind of the lower, more immediate reaction and how we evolve and move forwards. Whereas a Mars transit, it takes 2 months to go through a sign versus the Pluto version, which Pluto will take 15 to 18 years. So you kind of get that, kind of the dual action going. You're evolving on one level with Pluto, and then the lower level and the more physical level with Mars. If anybody has any questions as we're going along, or I totally jump track, throw something at me.
I know it works also with aspects to the nodes, but does it aspect other planets also, or because it's a soul traveling thing, it just relates only to the nodes?
No, it can affect everything, but the main thing with that evolutionary astrology goes with is Pluto and the north and south node. The north node being future destiny, south node being past karma to be worked out. And I kind of think of it, the analogy I like is like building a puzzle. It's like you have all these puzzle pieces, and sometimes, you know, Venus and Aries can mean blah, blah, blah. But once you put like the outer framework of the puzzle together, when you put Pluto and the nodes into the chart, and you see where the soul is, what the past and future karma is of that soul, what the evolutionary intent is, and then when you put the Venus and Aries into the chart, that makes a lot more sense, because you've got the outer framework built for the chart of where is this individual going? What are they here to achieve this time? And then the Venus and Aries or whatever means a lot more, because you then have some perspective on where it's coming from, where it's going to.
Is it always used, can you do everything with the chart with it, or can you also add past life regression to help with the answers?
Yes, you can also, a lot of evolutionary astrologers do past life regressions. I've not gotten that far yet. I've not specialized in it. But yes, a lot of them do, and you can look back and see key signatures or themes from previous lives. And some of the ones that have been doing it a long time can give specific examples and things from other incarnations that are still being worked on. You have a question?
I had a question about octaves. So you were talking about Pluto and Mars. So would that relationship for Venus be Saturn, and then Mercury is Jupiter?
It's Neptune and Venus, or Neptune is the higher octave, which is kind of universal love, we're all one, kumbaya, my lord, that kind of thing. And Venus is more the like one-on-one personal love between two people. And then with Mercury is a lower octave of Uranus. Uranus rules like the intuition, some of the like subconscious things, the collective unconscious, kind of that information we're able to draw from. Mercury is the individual person's mental processes, their intellect.
You said Pluto and Mars are the
Yeah.
So with Mars being lower, the transit would be sooner.
Right.
How often is a Mars
It'll stay in a sign. It takes 2 years to go through the chart, 2 months in a sign. Anybody else? Okay. And mhm. Okay. A lot of there's a news story that came out a couple years ago. I'll try to keep this a quick aside, but it's an important one, I think. A few years ago, they kind of said Pluto was no longer a planet. This was a political, nonsensical. This was called funnily enough, Pluto rules conspiracies, assassinations. Right. And it rules hidden things, and assassinations is probably the most important one for the situation, because actually what had happened is this Pluto was downgraded at one of the big astronomical conferences in it was Sweden or Belgium a few years ago. And what had happened was earlier in the day, and you had to search to find this, but earlier in the day, a bunch of the scientists had gotten in a big argument. And the ones that won the argument, at the end of the day, when almost everyone had left the conference, they went ahead and left. The people who had lost the earlier argument, which I don't even know what the discussion was on, but they said, hey, let's get these guys back. Everyone else had left the conference. There was like 5% of the people still there. Everyone else had left to go home. And they said, yes, essentially the same thing as passing the Federal Reserve Act. So they waited until everyone had left, and they said, hey, let's make Pluto not a planet anymore, even though there's really no. So that was pretty much, ironically, an assassination on Pluto. So that's kind of a nonsensical thing they tried to throw. That was a totally political, tongue sticking out at other people that had made a point with them earlier. But, and even on the wild stretch, let's say, okay, they did get rid of Pluto as a planetoid or a dwarf planet or whatever they call it this week. Right, it's still the same energy. It still rules the same things. It was still in the same sign, the same years, the same days, still retrograde the same times. So whether you call it a planet or a planetoid or a subhumanoid planet or whatever you call it, it's still the same thing, still at the same spot in the sky. You're just arguing semantics at that point. Okay. I put in a couple cheat sheets in here for you, just for some general things. You've heard all the. Was that all the questions on that? Did that answer your question? Okay. The same theory applies with the whole precession of the equinoxes thing too. That they try to argue that. They try to argue every 5 years. Some scientist comes out and says, "Oh, astrology doesn't know what it's doing because they don't account for the precession of the equinoxes because all the planets have moved from where they were 2,200 years ago, whatever." And it's like, yes, that's true, they have, but astrologers don't measure from the same point in the sky. I mean, we're not morons. We don't look at the same things we looked at 2,200 years ago. It's like the vernal equinox is on March 20th. So, like 0 degrees Taurus will start 30 days after the vernal equinox. We're still not looking at the wrong part of the sky saying, hey, why isn't that there anymore? So that's just a way to try and discredit something you want to discredit. So. Right. Well, and that's one of the things too is that's another thing they don't tell you. Most astronomers were astrologers back then. They try to make it sound like, astrology is this new age thing that somebody just thought of 30 years ago, and it's like, really, I guess the Greeks and Romans and Egyptians didn't exist then. So anyways, I made a little cheat sheet. These are I'm sure you've heard the general descriptions of the signs. You know, Geminis like to communicate, and Libras like balance and relationships, but these are kind of these are the evolutionary astrology versions of them. And I think these are kind of, I think the other ones are too limiting, I believe. The cookie cutter ones you will normally read in the newspapers or in a lot of the cookie cutter books. But I think these touch more on the base archetypes of what the real meaning, the real archetype of each of the signs is. Because it's just to go with one example, like Cancer says, I grow emotionally with self-responsibility. And it's like you hear, you know, Cancer is associated with mother and the fourth house and security. And all these things are true, but there's a deeper level to it than that. And it's like Cancer is about providing security for yourself from within. It's about developing emotional security without needing some outside force or something to tell you, you know, to validate you or to validate your emotions. It's the basic core meaning of Cancer is to develop your own emotional security and not be at the whim of whatever society says you should be or how you should feel or so that's one example of those. And then I also made a little cheat sheet here for you of Pluto through the houses. as Pluto goes through each sign, you know, as people you know get older, as you get older, you tend to kind of rebel against the previous generation. You kind of, they're an irritant. And as you go back, you actually, a lot of times you'll have more in touch with the generation before the generation that's right under you. Just because by aspect you have a sextile being formed between those two.
So your grandparents and everything?
Yeah, there would almost be a more, because like the Pluto in Virgo generation would have a little more understanding with the Pluto in Cancer generation maybe than they would than the Pluto in Leo. But this kind of gives you an idea of whatever house Pluto is in your birth chart, or whatever house it's transiting through in your chart now. This is kind of a base. When Pluto's going through each house, this is kind of telling you what the evolutionary intent is for that time. And to pick one example, I'm going to guess that since everyone here is at the Universal Light Expo, and since everyone here is sitting in an astrology class, probably a fair number of people here probably have Pluto in the 11th house. Because, you know? No? First house? Fifth? That's creative actualization. And where's yours? Eighth. Okay, Pluto rules the 8th house. That's a very powerful place. You have that as well, don't you?
First.
You have Pluto in the first.
I'm not that much of a Scorpio.
Yeah. Right, you're not.
And I have money issues, mine's in my second, my husband's
It's-
money, so I know.
Well, a lot of people that will have either Pluto and or Uranus in their 11th house just because they're in a state of deconditioning from the societal norms, what we're spoon-fed to believe, what society thinks we should be doing. And those can also be, it doesn't necessarily have to be Pluto in the 11th house, you can also have Pluto conjunct Uranus, or Pluto aspecting Uranus, Pluto aspecting your 11th house. There's kind of different flavors you can come to get the same end result. Just like 11th house Virgo, or 11th house Aquarius and Uranus are all kind of saying the same thing, because it's all that Uranus 11th house Aquarius energy. And Uranus rules astrology, and so anything in your 11th house will have kind of the feeling of wanting to decondition from what we've always told is right, or if people tell you astrology is crazy, or anything outside what the status quo wants you to believe, then that planet is in a state of deconditioning and trying to shed itself from what everyone is told is right, or what's really going on, or what we should be. And you can do this with each of the 12 houses. And then as planet transits through a house, as we live, Pluto keeps moving. And every time it goes through a new house, whatever house Pluto's going through, you'll kind of have the death, rebirth, destruction thing. You have as all the Scorpios I know say, the rug pulled out from under you thing that happens. And then it's like the phoenix. That's one of the symbols for Scorpio. You have the death, rebirth, transformation. You have the bird, gets really big, powerful, burns itself up, turns into ashes, but only so that it can create itself in a bigger, better, more powerful, more truer sense of itself. And you'll find that lots of Scorpio people attract these kind of situations to themselves, where they keep going through like these. Most people die once, Scorpios die like 50 times. Is kind of the yeah, it's kind of the analogy I've heard, and it's almost like they're kind of attracted to it almost, because they need that, and anything that doesn't have that intensity is boring, and so they need that continual kind of. Right, it is. It's almost like an addiction, almost. So, and as Pluto goes through these houses, we will see the death, rebirth, transformation in whatever house Pluto is in your chart.
Scorpio being fixed water sign, the word phoenix is actually Gaelic for clear water. I thought that was
Unlike this.
Also, when you're going through over a period of 18 years, it could start out transiting in one house, because the signs are unequal in the houses.
Right.
And so therefore you're going to have two houses at least involved.
Right.
Yeah.
That.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, just like with anything, you may not have exactly even cusp, so it's not necessarily in a house for so many years. You can be affecting two houses during one sign transit. And then we have the same thing with the nodes. The north node is future, destiny, what you're supposed to be working towards. South node is like the energies you want to be moving away from. And here I made you a couple cheat sheets. And actually I combined it into one, because the nodes are always exactly opposite. The nodes will always be exactly opposite in your chart. So if your north node is in the first house, your south node will be in the 7th. And so you have every possible combination on these two, because then you have north node 7th, south node 1st. A couple of the big things that you get out of evolutionary astrology that you don't from other kinds is, you have a phenomenon called skip steps, where if you have planets squaring the nodal axis, the north and south node, Those are things that in previous lifetimes they're called skip steps, where the soul tried to avoid dealing with those situations or with that energy. They were just lazy about it, didn't want to do the emotional work, didn't want to do the psychological work. And any planets square the nodes in your chart now will be highlighted, because those are energies that will need additional effort, additional attention paid to kind of resolve those so that they don't keep working.
About custom. Is there a difference between 0 Pisces and 30 degrees Aquarius?
I think it goes from like 2959 to 0. Huh?
So if a 0 Pisces, that's when they're talking about you being a cusp, are you really truly affected by both?
I think you are affected by both, because when it's that close, and also all the inner planets travel at a pretty quick and similar rate. Mercury transit's about 3 weeks. Venus is about 3 weeks. Mars is 2 months, but you very likely, if you're a sun sign Capricorn, you very likely have other stuff in Capricorn, Sagittarius, or Aquarius. Just because the inner planets are always traveling close. So if you're right on the are you right on the cusp of
0 degrees Pisces. The Aquarius Pisces.
Yeah, because I'm like 7 hours from, I'm a Pisces, like 7 hours from being Aries. So I do kind of feel that I get some of both. Yes.
Mars 20th?
Yes,
Yeah, my
exactly. Oh, really? Really?
For you, you're close to the 0 Aries, the really big important.
Yeah. I'm like 2946.
Aries point, you're Aries, yeah. That's
Right.
the point when everything gets aspected, and you really notice it, don't you?
Well, yeah. Well, I have a grand trine in my chart. I have like 6 planets in water signs plus a Saturn in Aries. So I'm all or nothing all the time.
When you were talking about the skipped steps, so if you have a grand cross in your chart and you skipped a lot of steps,
Is the nodal axis involved in those? Is the north and south node? Well, then you would probably have at least 2 planets that you would have had. What are your other 2 that are? What are the 2 that are squaring the nodes?
it's Mars and let me say Mars and Uranus.
Okay. Well, just like in that scenario, Mars as a skip step was probably, in most cases, I'd have to look at your chart and whatnot, but in most scenarios, a Mars skip step is someone who was not able to give forth their energy properly in a previous life. They were not able to for some reason, they could not be aggressive or could not act instinctually, or they were repressed, and their action or energy was repressed in some way. Somebody with Uranus square and since you have Mars and Uranus in opposition and square the nodes, to me that's somebody that had a lot of energy and a lot of chances to stand up maybe for what they thought was wrong and didn't or couldn't or weren't able to. So maybe like they were held back or repressed from taking action that or righting a wrong maybe that they felt they should have. And so now I think now in this life it probably comes out more as somebody who maybe feels very rebellious inside, but can't always properly express it. So what will normally happen is situations will come up where you'll be irritated. Am I on ball? Am I on point here at all? Well, what's happening there is maybe it's something you hadn't expressed before or been able to, so now you're needing to. So typically, we do the pendulum thing. We're too far one way, then we go too far the other way. Then hopefully the pendulum swings a little closer to the middle, and we're able to, right. To eventually achieve balance. But that's because previously you weren't able to or couldn't express the rebelliousness or take action on something you felt you needed to. So now that's going to be more of an issue, and it's going to come out in some way. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Then wouldn't the houses and sign placements show her how to do it this time?
Right. And it also, yes, and it depends on what sign and houses the nodes are in, and what houses and sign Mars and Aries are in. But that's just a general that's normally how that scenario plays out.
And that's based on the natal chart?
Yeah.
Okay, then what if you have a transit and you have a square to the north and south? Same thing?
Yes, actually that will kind of activate the nodes. So if I know I'm supposed to be a hairdresser, and I've known all my life I'm supposed to be a hairdresser, but I've done everything but be a hairdresser, when I have, or have hair. Actually, I spent an hour on my hair. I just left it at home. I just forgot to bring it with me. Sorry. When you have something transiting that'll square the nodes, that will activate that. And even though squares are seen as negative energies, sometimes negative energy is better than no energy. Sometimes you need something that's kick-started that you haven't been able to, then being able to put a little bit of energy, even if it's some negative energy, that's, sometimes you have to crank the lawnmower really hard to get it started. So if I've been avoiding my ultimate destiny as a hairdresser, and then I have sometimes I may need a Uranus or Mars squaring the nodes to get me back on my hairdressing course. Well, Pluto squaring the nodes is probably the most intense of the ones, because that meant your skip step was Pluto. That means you neglected what your soul's basic purpose was.
Last time?
Yes. Maybe more than just the last time. That means you definitely, you did not ever engage your entire spirit in your life pursuits or.
That's coming up.
Is
Okay.
it just the square, or does an opposition work that way too?
Um,
I'd like you to live long enough to see that opposition.
Opposition to Pluto or to the nodes?
To the Pluto itself.
Yeah, an opposition to Pluto is, well, and actually this works with, there's a little trick, this works with any planet in your chart. If you look at, okay, I have Mars in the 11th house, say, and it's like, I don't know, I can't get a feel on that, I don't really know what it means or what I'm supposed to be doing with that, then you can always look at the polarity. So the exact opposite, imagine if you have a book, it has the descriptions and you have Mars in the 11th, look at and see what Mars in the 5th says. So.
I was just trying to say what it act like. Being that I'm trying to get a grip on the evolutionary part. If Pluto is opposing its own Pluto, you read it like a regular. It has nothing to do with the evolutionary part. It's just a regular opposition.
Right. It's just there are more detailed things into it you can go into. But essentially, you look at Pluto, because Pluto forms very few aspects to itself during a person's lifetime. Yeah, most people get through the opposition, maybe one more. But you can, with any planet, you can look at the opposite sign and house, and that will show you that's how I evolve to that next. That's where I'm going. That's how I evolve to that next step. So when you have, say, if you're born with Pluto in Cancer, those people were born, you know, more nurturing. Family was a big thing. Family was a very important back then, much, much more so than now. And then in, like as Pluto transits Capricorn as it is now, it's about, Pluto in Capricorn is about accountability, self-accountability. So it's all about, we need to rebuild better structures. We need to get rid of the structures that don't work. Government. And then, sorry, I had something in my throat. It was a $5 ATM charge, I think. But like with Pluto going through Capricorn, we're learning that we've been asleep for a very long time, and we've let government run rampant, we've let the healthcare industry get out of control, and we've let our politicians just go crazy, and we've let the corporations take over our country. So now it's about self-accountability. It's about, okay, we have to tear down the structures that we let build up behind us when we were sleeping.
Is that career chaos for a lot of people too?
It's more, it can be status crisis. Right. That. Right. Pluto in Capricorn is destroying structure. So as our economy is destroyed, more people are having to say, well, I can't find a job, so you know what, I'm going to create one. Yes. The best evolutionary astrologers out there is Jeffrey Wolf Green is the one who started this. He's got 3 books. The first one's just called Pluto, Evolutionary Journey of the Soul. And then the second one is Pluto 2, the sequel, I think. The Empire Strikes Back, I think.
The second one is relationships. I just bought it.
Yeah, so we meet again, eh? Yes, that's it. I would say as far as evolutionary, I'll stop. As far as evolutionary astrology goes, those are the 2 best books. He also has a Uranus book. Stephen Forrest also deals with the evolutionary astrology and is very excellent, obviously. And there's a couple books they wrote together. And then out of the newer people, the biggest one, there's Deva, D-E-V-A Green, which is Jeff Green's daughter. And then there is Maurice Fernandez, who is very, very good. Okay. I guess that's pretty much. Oh, very quickly, last 2 pages are evolutionary states. There are 4 evolutionary states. 70% of the population in any society at any time will be in the consensus state, and that's just doing what society feels is best for them, not questioning authority, trying to. And then I'd imagine most of the people in this building here today are probably in the individuated state, which is starting to question the norms of society and wanting more self-expression and not letting others make choices for them by doing things like going to astrology classes and the Universal Light Expo. Does anyone have any last-minute questions? Any?
With all the energy that's coming through to us now, does that impact astrology? Taking it into account?
Well, I don't think that it necessarily affects astrology. Everything is going really fast. Like time is like doubling up on itself. We don't have, it used to be you'd send that energy out there and then eventually that energy would return. Now it's almost like we're moving from living on tape delay to living in real time. Everything's happening, and that's why you're seeing the people snapping and stuff, because if you don't have any kind of a spiritual basis or anything, they don't know how to deal with stuff, and it's like, oh my God, why is all this stuff happening really fast?
You're on Capricorn roll trying to just clutch onto something.
Yes, trying to clutch onto something physical.
I think most people don't feel like they have enough time to get whatever it is they need to do yet.
No, oh, right, absolutely, absolutely.